the majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Mr. Chad Bahl, welcome back to the Liminal Living Podcast, your third appearance with us here. Number three.
Excited. Yes, sir.
Number three. And the cool part about this one is you have now published another book, The Death of Supernaturalism, with your handsome face on the back. I like this. And
a very important quote in support of the book on top of that face.
I'm on the back with Thomas J. Ord, who was on the show a little while ago. But yeah, the Tom and Tom supported book. That's cool. I'm in good company. Seismic theological shifts is what I think I said.
Yes, sir. Let's hope.
I think it is because, we think of God as that the man with the white beard in the sky, kind of like we get our concept from God from the Greek understanding of like Zeus or something, or Apollo.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily how it's always been. And then we create this other whole category for God and the supernatural, called, supernatural realm. It's a separate realm, and tying God back into the natural world, I think we're getting back to some roots of the faith that are really important to revisit. So.
Yeah, I think it makes sense of a lot of things that I guess for a lot of us that, we use the term deconstruction, but a lot of us that have deconstructed a more conservative evangelical faith have found problematic, at times. And those that are not of any faith, I think, find problematic, and you find reasons not to believe in God because of it or have faith. Atheism is one of the most rapidly growing sectors of the spectrum, and I think there's probably good reasons why, and I think those reasons need to be addressed by believers.
Yeah, I think so too. I was talking with a guy yesterday, and he said that he's an atheist, but he's done 2 weddings, and he's ordained in the Church of Dudism from the Big Lebowski, the Dude. There's a whole religion, online religion based on that. It's just kind of funny, and it's all based on his teachings, and it's an official religion you can get ordained in and do weddings in. I was like, I didn't know this was a thing.
That's a thing? Okay.
Yeah, that's a thing. Dudism.
You're not a Buddhist, you're a Dudist.
Yeah, he's a high priest in the Dudist religion.
All right.
That cracked me up. But yeah, there's like this rise of people just checking out because our faith isn't keeping up with the revelations of science and biology, psychology. I list a whole bunch of stuff in some previous conversations, and they're just like, this is old and outdated, doesn't make sense anymore, and they just kind of walk away from it for good reason, because we haven't given them, I guess, a deeper understanding of things could be.
A definition that was given to me once, and I found that was very helpful, of conservatism versus progressivism, is that conservatives don't necessarily think that there wasn't, advancement or revelation or, a gain in knowledge at some point. They just think that at some point it stopped. And conservatives always want to go back to that point, and anything new and fresh and new ways of thinking about things, are an affront to that in some sense. And progressives are simply willing to say revelation's ongoing. We're constantly learning, and science and philosophy are partners to seeking that truth. Yeah. And I agree 100%.
There's like a whole theological camp called cessationism. It's like, no, once we got the Bible, we're all set. We didn't need anything else. It's an actual, I think they teach that at Dallas Theological and the Southern Baptist Convention. It's that kind of is emphasized against like Pentecostal charismatic gifts. Like we don't need any of those gifts described in the Bible anymore because now we have the Bible. But they
Sure.
take that logic further than that and say, we don't need yoga. We don't need psychology. We don't need counseling. We have the Bible and this is good enough. And it's almost like they deny a supernatural realm as well, just because it's all in your head and get the right ideas up there and arrange your mental furniture just fine and everything's good to go. But
Yeah.
it's not. That world's falling apart fast.
Yeah. Theological progressives, and that's a misconception, it's not as if we're not seeking piety. It's not as if we're not seeking a relationship with God, with the divine. We are, and we're doing so in passionate ways. It's just that we're passionate about doing so in ways that are livable and practical and that make sense.
Yeah, there you go.
With how we, with modern ways of thinking, and we're willing to change if we come up against a bump in the road. Our experience of God, our relationship with God, is not dependent upon certain notions, that may or may not be, proven to be true or false.
Yeah.
It's more for us. It's the experience of God, and it's an openness to discovery. And I think that's what's important, and that's what really my book goes into. For so long we've thought about God as this being in a supernatural realm. In one, I talk about how supernaturalism, that term, wasn't around until the Middle Ages. Originally, when the in the first century, when Christ was around, and for 1,000 years after, we never thought in those terms. So it's a fairly new way of thinking of things, but also, as we do think of God in a separate supernatural realm, it becomes problematic for a number of reasons. If God is able to exist up there somewhere, sticking the divine hand into a situation, meddling and, working all things according to the divine will, then it creates a lot of problems. It creates theodicy problems. For me, that was the biggest thing that forced me to rethink faith, to deconstruct away from conservative faith, that if a good God exists and there's a all-powerful being able to control all circumstances, then why does all the crap that happened in this world happen? And we have to find reasons for, the greater good behind things, because obviously, if God doesn't directly make something happen, God certainly allows it to happen. And so why? We chalk it up to a mystery card. We chalk it up to trying to reason, the plan behind all things. And when you just can't do that, when cancer just sucks, when tragedies in life occur, the death of children, rape, murder, but then on a larger scale, world wars and the Holocaust, it's really hard at times to posit what could be a greater good behind those events. And it leads us to question God. So supernaturalism becomes problematic in that sense. Supernaturalism becomes problematic in talking about issues of, it's called divine hiddenness, and Schellenberg's theory of that if God is relational, and if we're open to relationship, then why doesn't God make the divine, make God's self more apparent to us? Why does, if God is able to control all things, well, gosh, that's not, that doesn't jive very well with scientific investigation. So naturally, supernaturalism becomes something that doesn't comport well with science and scientific investigation. And then as science is able to explain more, then God becomes less and less, because we don't need God as much. And God becomes relegated to something that we call a God of the gaps, where God just shrinks and shrinks as science becomes more and more. And so these two things are opposing each other. And supernaturalism, in my estimation, is responsible for that. And the last thing I talk about in the book is supernaturalism and biblical literalism, that if God is an all-powerful being existing up there somewhere, then certainly God could have made sure that every word in the Bible is exactly what was intended and means exactly what it says. And we don't have to look any further into things and find the root meaning behind things. We don't have to do hermeneutics, that we can take all things to be exactly as God intended. And gosh, it creates a lot of issues when we find issues of divine violence, and genocides that occur in the Old Testament. contradictions throughout the Bible, it
Mm-hmm.
begins to question a lot of things. And when supernaturalism is our only option, then a lot of people do tend to check out. And that's where we see, at least I posit that's why, or one of the reasons why, we see a lot of growth in those that are calling themselves nuns or atheists. I really think we have to rethink some of these notions.
Yeah.
And so that's what I offer in my book, is kind of a rethinking of those things.
Mm-hmm. And a critique of supernaturalism is also a critique of the binary system of materialism versus supernaturalism. It's not just a critique of the one, and then we all have to retreat into a material world and then find some kind of a physical understanding of God. Like
No.
it's not a rejection of spirit, not a rejection of, it's a rejection of relegating spirit into a separate category that cannot be seen, tasted, touched, felt, studied, outside of the material world. It's like that binary system of materialism and supernaturalism is just not, it doesn't help us explain science, let alone the faith. Because as we start to study more about how psychology works, about how big and old the universe is, as we start to learn all these different things, we can see that science, that strict materialism isn't a good way of having a meta narrative of how the whole universe works, but neither is the binary system of the back and forth of supernaturalism versus materialism. And so when I've tried to talk about your ideas to some people who you maybe have not read the book yet, they're like, well, if there's no supernaturalism, then we're just relegating God to the material world. And like, how does God work in a process naturalist understanding if it's not a separate sphere called supernaturalism? Like, where does God reside in the world? If it's not a separate realm, or say, like, how does that work?
Yeah. So, this all has to do with, and I use David Ray Griffin in my book, although, process thought has been around for a long time, very widely known through Alfred North Whitehead and his process in reality. But, many process thinkers affirm what they would call material mental monism. So not a dualism, two separate substances, body and mind, but they would say really that mind and matter are not fundamentally separate substances. That consciousness and matter both co-arise, that they're emergent. And they would say what's most fundamental to all things is not the substances that comprise us. And I know we'll get into this a little bit when we talk about the article that I wrote, but the experiences that we have. And that's the most fundamental aspect of reality. So we would still say there is a material world in the sense that there's objects that we can see, touch, taste, and feel. But we would also posit a spiritual realm in which God exists. But we would also say at the same time that that the substances which comprise spirit and mind and the matter that we see, taste, touch, and feel are not inherently separate substances. That they are two sides of the same coin, that there are important differences, but then also similarities. And that allows us to say things like the soul can become emergent from the physical self, and exist. We can talk about God in ways that are not relegating God to a scientific materialism. But in important ways, there are similarities because it is a naturalism. With a monistic sort of belief, the material mental monism does say, that all things are part of one single substance, and we would call that a natural realm. But then I would also argue again that, the supernatural realm is not something that we thought about, for at least until the past 800 years or so. So for me, it makes a lot of sense. For me, it is going back maybe to, with, again, some novel additions to the lack of separateness that we always used to have in theology, And I think it posits some novel ways to do it. So I
Yeah.
think it's important because when we talk about supernatural, we can talk about several things and have several meanings. And so we don't necessarily, a lot of people, when they think about supernatural, they think about anything that I can't see as part of the supernatural realm. That's not what we're saying. Griffin has a very specific definition of supernaturalism here that he uses, and it's what I use in my book. And it's simply the idea of a divine being who can and perhaps does intervene as to interrupt the world's most fundamental causal processes.
Mhm.
So it's not that an unseen God doesn't exist. It's simply that God is part of the natural realm as we're part of the natural realm. And there's no one, and again, I use the term up there somewhere, and some people don't like it. It's too, kind of esoteric, but there's no separate being intervening in the natural realm as that being wills to meddle and change things. As God has been traditionally ascribed characteristics like omnipotence, where God is able to do those things. So that's the difference that we're saying. So it is an important distinction. It's not a strict materialism, but it's a material mental monism, which again is a little heady, but at least for me, helps to make sense of things.
Mhm. I mean, I can't see my thoughts. If I were to put them in a physical location, they'd be like above my head, like the little thought bubble that
Right.
pops up. But that's not a part of the physical world. I can't see my consciousness. But if I go into meditation, I can expand consciousness from behind my eyes to my whole body to the whole room I'm sitting in. You can it's just weird what you can do with different meditative states. You could say that that's part, like the brain waves and what they're doing and all that kind of stuff. But we don't know what consciousness is or even where it comes from. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things in the scientific world that we still can't explain, that I don't think we can just boil down to chemicals in the brain, or, how fast your brain waves happen to be functioning, or things like that. So yeah, I don't think that. And if we have a supernatural God, this is the one critique I really latch onto as a pastor. I think the reason that we're very lax to get rid of that is because as we lose authority in the material world, as the God of the gaps keeps getting explained away and retreating back and back.
Right.
It gives us that sense of authority, but we still have this authority here of the supernatural realm that we can exercise over people, over culture, over society. You can have your science and all your stuff, but we still have control of this little spot of the map here. And it gives us that sense of control that we've had probably since, Rome took over things in 300 or so. But I think that sense of control, we don't know how to not be in control, to not be the ones who get to dictate truth and the metaphysic that we all need to agree to. And so having that supernatural realm, we hold on so tightly to it because it's like that last shred left. Instead, I think we need to then have that cosmic humility that says, well, it's time to partner with how God is revealing the universe to us in other realms of science and psychology and cosmology and all those things. So that's kind of what I pastorally latch onto. Is it's an invitation to humility that we haven't had to do in a very long time as a faith, and I think it would be good for us. So
yeah, I think control and certainty are the two things that keep supernaturalism afloat. In light of maybe fairly compelling evidence against it, and it is something that we need to humbly reconsider. And the cool thing is, if we posit a God who is a God of not just some out there supernatural realm, but as a God that's a God right here, right now, involved in all things, and creator of all things, then when science discovers something that we previously couldn't explain, that's miraculous. miracle. That's a bigger God, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't put God in competition with science.
There
It
you
makes
go.
the God of scientific investigation.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge.
Yeah. God in competition with science. Instead, it's more like when science makes a discovery, it makes God that much bigger. I like that. That's really good. That's really good. Well, if people want to dive into this subject more, we talked about your dissertation on this topic.
Yeah.
Um, I think it was back in the springtime we talked about
It was
that.
like April or May, yeah.
Yeah. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today was an article you just wrote. You sent it to me and you're like, "Hey, you might find this interesting." And it kind of blew up my mind because you took these concepts of God and, supernaturalism versus process naturalism. And then you applied it into kind of like the opposite of God, what we would call Satan and demonic and evil forces. Yeah, well, if God is not in this supernatural realm as an all-powerful being, then how does evil work? Who is Satan? What are demons? That's something that's really interesting, and it's kind of hot topic right now with all of these. Well, it's Halloween season right now as we're talking, and it's also a lot of like horror movies, paranormal investigators, exorcists. Like there's a lot of things in pop culture right now that draw people's attention to this, and not relegating them to the supernatural world has some really interesting things in there. So what brought about this article that you started to think these thoughts, but over there for that topic?
Yeah, so I think it's my tendency just once I grab onto a thread, I need to pull it all the way to the end. And if there's questions along the way, I need to find answers. I mean, again, it's how the problem of theodicy, at least for me, drew me away from conservative evangelicalism into a process naturalism, because as I pulled the thread, things didn't make sense. I couldn't find the answers that I felt comfortable with. I found contradictions. I felt appeals to mystery, all that sort of things. And I wasn't happy with that. When you get into process naturalism, and I guess in parentheses here, I'm a huge horror buff. I love this time of year. My wife and I just watched like 4 of the Halloween movies last weekend. Yeah, I love me some Conjuring series. Just amazing stuff. But I think within all of that context is a reality that we can't deny. It's not just positing God and goodness and explaining theology, but it's also explaining the opposite of that. That there are powers and principalities that are at work that we can't explain. That traditionalism has explanations for that we've bought into. So we're going to say that there isn't a supernatural realm for these demons and entities to exist in, then how do we explain that in the same way that we might explain God's existence? So David Ray Griffin, again, was one of the process thinkers that did some work in this area. So I pulled out my DRG books and read through them. He has a number of things to say, and that's really what got me interested.
Oh, nice. So paint a picture of the thing you are critiquing. Like help us to understand, the definition of Satan, evil, and demons that you are critiquing. Not necessarily how your understanding of it now, but the critique. Like paint that picture for us. What is Satan that is this article is trying to redefine for us?
Yeah, so I guess I'm critiquing the existence of a literal person referred to as Lucifer, Satan. That there is we can go to an extreme and say, the cartoonish devil with a pitchfork, or even an entity that exists, a powerful entity that exists alongside God, that is literal, that is tempting, that is fallen from heaven, the supernatural realm. And I guess when we can't posit supernaturalism anymore, we have to do something with those images. So I guess I'm critiquing the concept of a literal person, and that distinction will be, important as we get into my explanation or Griffin's explanation. But the existence of a literal person pulling the strings of evil, a person waiting for us, as some people might think, waiting to inflict eternal conscious torment on those that don't believe the right things or do the right things, that exists eternally, to punish the sinner. Those sort of things don't make sense if you're not allowed to have a supernatural realm. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm
And
critiquing.
like that even that understanding of Satan did not exist in the Hebrew scriptures or the Old
Right.
Testament. Like that
No.
is the result of Jewish apocalypticism of
Right.
like the Enoch books paired with like Greek mythologies of Hades. And then you kind of pull those things together in, you know, in the times right after Jesus, and then we start getting that picture. So that's not even true to what was in the scriptures originally anyways. So you're not dismantling something that the scriptures are trying to hold up. You're more of dismantling something that tradition assembled after the scriptures that has just kind of stuck into our consciousness for a long time. And so
Yeah,
I think that's important.
I would say so, but then, if you're more conservative and you're listening to this podcast, you might, think, well, Jesus referred to Satan. That Satan is a lion, looking for those that he might devour, sort of things. And I think we just have to ask ourselves, is Jesus referring to a literal person, at that point, or is there more, allegory going on, or maybe even accommodation, to how his original audience might have thought of evil, and the existence of evil. So I do think there are some references that you have to rethink, at least from how we used to think as traditional conservatives. But I do think we're able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the early understanding of Satan in the book of Job is that it was just one of the higher entities in the council of God,
Right.
and then there's this evolution of that. All of the passages that refer to Lucifer in the prophetic stream would be actual literal kings in Babylon and whatnot. And then we have Ezra, or not Ezra. I just lost the word. I just said it earlier. The apocalyptic books that were not in the Enoch. Sorry. Yeah. The books of Enoch come out and they're more apocalyptic, and that shaped the understanding of Jesus's day. So he will use like what the running understandings of the day to operate within. But then there's this huge evolution afterwards that we have what we have now. And I think if Satan is like this person that is over all evil, trying to make evil happen in the world as the opponent of God in a supernatural realm, then it's very easy to then make like the concept of evil or sin into like a conspiracy. Like everything's trying to trick you from the truth that we know is true. And the Satan is right there. So don't trust your emotions, and don't trust your experience, and don't trust what science tells you, because we already know what's true. And there's this person trying to trick you all the time. And it's another way of maintaining control of the narrative and the metaphysic of the universe in a way that just doesn't work anymore or make sense. And what you did in that article was you kind of take it from that understanding, a person who's in charge of all evil and a big conspiracy to try and trick you and get you into hell, and you kind of bring it down into like just the realm of the human world of like there's institutional forces at work. And I was thinking as I'm driving here, like, why is it that I can sit down and talk to one human and we're totally cool? Like we can disagree on a lot of things, but it's good one-on-one. But then you get a bunch of humans together and we build some kind of a system, and it never is. It's always corrupt. Economic systems are always bad. Political systems, denominational systems. Like whenever humans get together in mass and then we build a system behind it, there's always corruption in it. We can never do it right and never do it good. And I'm like, there's something to be said there. Can you tell us how your understanding of process naturalism and evil works in that institutional bureaucratic system?
Yeah, and I would even say the bigger the system, the worse it can get. So,
yeah, for sure.
And it's us, part of us being, Schleiermacher would call it, a lack of God consciousness, not being in tune to the divine will, conscious of God's lore towards love and towards good, and that's how he would kind of explicate us being fallen beings, is the absence of God consciousness. And so, that's something we constantly need to be seeking after. But Griffin, says that, well, evil doesn't just exist, but demonic evil exists. And his definition of demonic evil is, he would say, it's evil that diametrically opposes divine power and does so with a strength that can destroy creation in a way that threatens divine purposes. So he would say that it's not just bad things or unfortunate circumstances, but it's a powerful force that exists, that opposes the lore of the divine, that opposes good and love, and threatens the purposes of the divine. So basically, Griffin would say that evil is simply that which opposes good. So it can be seen at the personal level. When we see hate versus love, that's evil. When we harm people, when we take what's theirs, that's evil. But then it could be defined, like you say, in the systems that we think of. It can be defined in terms of patriarchal systems, heteronormativity, white supremacy. I would say the extremes of unfettered capitalism and, historically speaking, versions of communism. They can all exist as systems of power that oppose what God wants to accomplish on earth. And so for me, that reframing, and we'll get to the ontology of that in a minute, I'm sure, but that reframing just takes the theoretical and makes it practical. It's no longer these evil metaphors in some otherworldly cosmic realm. We get to think on the level of right here, right now, where the rubber meets the road. And I think that's helpful for me. Not only does it give me more of a naturalistic view of evil, one that comports with, a process naturalism worldview, but it makes me inherently ask the question, well, then what do I do about it? I can't defeat this devil with a pitchfork in a supernatural realm. Theoretically, that person's going to always exist. Hopefully I won't see him in hell someday. No, it says that evil is what occurs around us on a daily basis, and we can either be part of the problem or part of the solution.
Yeah. And labeling evil into that systemic entrapment of we're caught into a large bureaucratic institution. So we have to go along with this. We have no other choice, or else there's going to be consequences on my life or whatever. That's the problem of power.
Yeah.
That I believe the Old Testament would call idolatry. There's an unseen force that determines the quality of my life that I have to make sacrifice to in order to appease it. And we think that that's referring to, a little statue, it's like, stop worshiping the idols. We don't worship idols anymore because we're civilized, Western society people.
Yeah.
We don't believe in unseen hands that, it's like, but then you look at how we describe a capitalistic economy, and it's like, oh, we're going to have to make sacrifices to the unseen force that, we actually call it the unseen hand of the market, like it's going to do all good for us if we just let it do its thing and sacrifice to it and sacrifice our well-being, or, these members of our society or the disabled, or as long as we remain faithful to the economy, it will do right by us. That's an unseen force that determines the quality of our life that we're asked to be sacrificed to. It's right there. But we can't see that as Christians if Satan and demons and all that, they are persons, consciousnesses in a supernatural realm trying to just trick me into hell. We can't see the systemic evil that is embedded into all the systems around us as evil. It's more of like they're neutral, or that's just what happens in economies. There's no other way to do it. So we can't bring that into our definition of evil and how it works, because we've relegated it somewhere else. So therefore it can't apply to capitalism, but it
Right.
certainly applies to communism. But it can't apply it to, Christian nationalism. You can't apply it to, white supremacy, because we're talking about an unseen realm and a supernatural force and whatever.
Right.
So I think it brings it right home to the air that we breathe inside of, the places we live in,
Yeah, it's on the same token of, comporting with science. When we discover more about science, then God becomes smaller, in traditional thoughts. But when we learn more about maybe systems of power or how corrupt humanity is and all the evil stuff that humanity can do, then the devil tends to become smaller. Well, maybe that isn't Satan doing it. Maybe that's just how crappy humans are.
Oh, that's interesting.
And again, I don't want to get rid of the spiritual realm. What I want to get rid of is the supernatural realm that maybe becomes something that gives us an excuse, not to rethink how we live our daily lives. So one thing, and I think it's worth going into, because it was important for me to not then relegate evil to groupthink. Okay. I want to say that just as God isn't a compilation of all the good that humanity can do, that I want to say that evil is a personal force that exists, maybe even a conscious force that exists. And so Griffin's ontology of evil helps me to do that. And one thing that's interesting about his thought about it is that he would say that that evil, or demonic evil, the demonic is created. That demonic evil is, in some senses, a created being. And to understand this, and it again becomes a little heady, but to understand this, we have to take a step back into process philosophy. And it says that the most fundamental component of any enduring object, basically lasting thing, not just puff of smoke, but lasting thing, is not the substances that make something up, but the experience of those substances. And that's the fundamental building block. So, in fact, as far as the theory of creation goes, they would say that trivial events, process thought says trivial events precede everything. That when we talk about the body, maybe cells are more fundamental to the body than the body itself. DNA might be more fundamental to cells and cellular creation and the function of those cells. Atoms may be more fundamental than DNA. Quarks might be even more fundamental than that. But process philosophy would go one step further and say more fundamental than the quarks that make up the atoms, that make up the DNA and the cells in the body, are the events that make up the quark. So it's events that bring about enduring objects fundamentally. And that's something that probably one of the hardest things for me to wrap my mind around with process philosophy. But if you can, I think it's a key to explaining a lot of this. So we might extrapolate that, to the formation of the demonic as an enduring object, that, we can see the bad choices that humanity makes. We can see the evil events that occur around us. And we can see, process philosophy would say that would be the foundation of this spiritual entity that would exist as an independent being, called this independent force called the demonic. And so process philosophy does make room for a spiritual realm, does make room for the existence of, obviously, of God, but then also of the demonic as an independent, relational, purposeful and even powerful force. So and it's created through the evil acts of creation, and fundamentally of humanity. Don't know if that makes sense. I'll let you ask any follow-ups, but it's important to think that it's not just groupthink, that it is the existence of a powerful force that's influential, but it's not supernaturalistic. And for me, that was a fundamental shift.
It is hard to wrap your mind around when you look at science and how materialistic it is. It's a study of the material world.
Yeah.
And then saying that events are foundational to like quarks and things also says that the experiences themselves are the things that shape our reality.
Absolutely.
Which almost would be like consciousness then is the foundation which everything is built on. And then that consciousness, well, for me, when you're talking about, it's not just groupthink.
Right.
There is a conscious evil force at work that is kind of, it makes me think that we can't relegate like a Machiavellianism, because if we think that we can set the good aside to get to an end that we wish and then do good later, it's not going to work, because the evil that we do in the present to get to the good ends we hope for is going to create then more evil. It's almost like the Buddhist understanding of karma. But because I say how you get something determines who you are when you have it is one of my sayings that I just kind of try to live by. I say it all the time.
Yeah.
And there's a sense that like Christians want more political power right now, so they are willing to partner with people that aren't doing great things in order to get the political power to then go and do more good with later. So they've suspended morality, they've suspended character and integrity in order to get power to do more good later. But that doesn't work under your realm of how evil works, because the evil things we're doing to get to the good ends we wish we could get by a different means is creating more evil in the world, creating more, the demonic forces in the world. I can see how this works, not just in like that systemic, institutional, bureaucratic, but then that temptation gets us to hang on to like ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could sell out our soul, pieces of our soul, to ideologies, and then not be able to see the evils in the ideologies that we embrace because we have good intentions or good ends in mind. And we're just going to have to suspend character and integrity to get to them for a later date. So I see how this brings that definition of evil, demonic, and Satan right down into the practical everyday. You cannot pursue peace through violence. You cannot get power through domination and violence and manipulation. You cannot get good by doing evil because it multiplies the evil. So am I making sense? I'm kind of talking out loud.
No, I think it makes perfect sense. And I think you added perfectly to, the points I was trying to get across. It basically makes every minute and every decision matter. And this is something that helps me make sense of, of things like spiritual warfare. So everything that we do either is a step towards the divine lore, towards love, towards good, towards the will of God, or something that ultimately feeds the beast, right? And it is a step towards the evil that exists in the world, creating more of it and propping it up and giving it a place that it doesn't deserve. And it is the will of God for us to be, we think of, in Ephesians where Paul tells us to be warriors and put on the full armor of God. In fact, it's the passage that comes, it's Ephesians 6, if I'm remembering my Bible correctly. But it's the passage right after where Paul says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of the world and the wickedness in high places. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what we're talking about with this process view of demonic evil. That is what spiritual warfare is against. And we
Mm-hmm.
can either be partners in creating it and making it more powerful, or we can be partners of God in tearing it down.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's what helped me make sense of the evil side of the process equation, I guess. And that's
Mm.
why I really felt compelled to write the article.
Yeah. And it takes that thought and it interweaves it through everyday life decisions and then
Yeah,
shows why integrity matters, why character matters, why decisions matter, why action matter, why holiness matters. So I see this as not a dismissing of evil or by saying it's, oh, it's all fake supernaturalism, whatever. I see it as bringing it more real, more serious, and making it more a part of our lived experience in very practical ways. Um, how would you see uh, some things just like catch fire, amongst us, amongst people like a zeitgeist almost, the
yeah,
spirit of the age, and some things just like grab a hold of large groups of people. And they could be, stupid, like the whole 6-7 thing. I have no idea what that means, but everybody's talking about it.
I am too. My
Um,
stepdaughter got me doing it. I
All
don't
right,
even.
I have no freaking idea what that's but
I think that's
everyone's,
the
it's
point
just
of
caught
being.
fire, right?
Yeah,
Just
it is.
totally caught fire.
Yeah,
But then you have like large political movements of World War II that, all of a sudden, like anger is now channeled into a political movement and then
good
uh,
example.
horrible things happen. So you got stupid things that are zeitgeist moments, but then you got very harmful, evil things that grab a hold of how does this work in like that understanding of a zeitgeist spirit of the age?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, in World War II, the church joined the wrong side. If we
Mm-hmm.
look at the Catholic Church in large ways, so this demonic evil is a powerful force that can tempt even the institutions that we think of as the best
Yeah.
and those that do the most good. Um, I think for me, the biggest change, the biggest, I guess, way in which it would apply, to this zeitgeist is the personal implications it has for us. I think traditional theologies, let's put it this way: traditional theologies can turn civic duty into a spectator sport.
Mm.
Because when evil is in the supernatural realm, and when God exists omnipotently in the supernatural realm, and we're just little ants and peons, not able to affect much, and God's will is ultimately going to be done, we can have the mindset of God's got this under control. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
happens, it's all part of God's plan, right? And we can sit there and eat our popcorn and pray for those that hurt, and be glad that we're not we're not them. I guess when other people are being affected by it. Um, if this process view of demonic evil is true, then that's the opposite of the case.
Mm-hmm.
We are part of the zeitgeist. We are part of the system, and the decisions we make, for better or for worse, the even the temptation towards complicity
Mm-hmm.
can be considered an evil act, a
Mm-hmm.
contagious evil act that makes
Mm-hmm.
us stand by and watch as these atrocities occur and do nothing about them.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that this theology tends to urge um, participation, that is more participatory in nature, I think
Yeah.
is definitely a key advantage to it.
Yeah. I think it invites us to discern,
Yeah,
like awareness. It invites us to prophetically speak against powers and systems and structures.
right.
And it brings it right into the fabric of our lived experience, our lives, how we operate in the world. So it does cause us, like, we need to have our eyes open and discern the spirits. I think John said something about that. So yeah, I think it is very helpful. So I'm going to put a link to your book and to the article down in the notes of this. So I know you have a hard at 12:15 and it is 12:15. But this was such a good article. Thank you so much for writing it and then coming on the show to talk with us about it. I'm just going to invite everyone to go and read the book and also read the article because they're both fantastic.
I appreciate that. I appreciate Tom, you having me on for a third time. That's a lot of trust that you're putting in me. But I think we had some good conversations, and I definitely think this is an important one. And so you being willing to kind of dive in, to that article, is something I truly appreciate. So many thanks to you, and as always, your support of the books that I've written and the work that I'm doing. So I truly do appreciate it, Tom. You're doing great work as well.
I appreciate you coming on. And there it is, the book right there. I can't cover the name, Chad Bahl. Well, Double Dr. Chad, thank you so much for joining us again, and have a good day.
Thank you so much. We'll see you, Tom.